What if the animal everyone dismissed since the 1940s turned out to be exactly right the first time? The highly disputed Nanotyrannus story doesn't move forward in a straight line. It swings back and forth, overlooked at first, then correctly identified, only to be talked out of existence again decades later. Finally, two independent labs, with no contact with each other's work, arrived at the same result. Nanotyrannus was real. Each swing reveals something about how scientists were reading the evidence correctly and incorrectly. So, before getting to what finally settled this decades-long debate in 2025, it helps to walk through how we got Nanotyrannus wrong, not once, but twice. Its story begins in 1942, when an unknown fossil collector working Montana's Hell Creek Formation uncovered a small skull. Nobody knew yet what species it belonged to, but it certainly came from a tyrannosaur predator. For context, this was the same year American forces were fighting across the Pacific. Paleontology back then moved a lot slower. There was no way yet to peer inside a bone and measure age or determine its species. That dating technology wouldn't exist for another 3 decades, arriving only around the same era nations were racing to fly to the moon. And to this day, we can't identify any dinosaur species from fossils alone, because they contain no intact DNA. Otherwise, Jurassic Park would have become a reality a long time ago.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
What the unknown collector found was a skull lined with sharp, blade-shaped teeth, clearly built for hunting. Its size stood out immediately though, roughly half that of a grown Tyrannosaurus rex. And this is where things first went sideways. In 1946, instead of recognizing it as something new, researchers simply filed it under a group of tyrannosaurs already known to science, called Gorgosaurus. Nobody realized they were looking at something entirely new. That single filing decision would end up shaping the following 30 years of one of the most heated debates in the field. It went on until 1988, and everything changed when paleontologist Robert Bakker and his team re-examined that very skull. What caught their attention was that its bones had fused together, a pattern typically seen only in fully grown specimens.
This is really weird. There's the furcula, but look at this. Again, very different from T-Rex furcula.
And Bakker called it Nanotyrannus. For the first time, this specimen had an identity of its own. That could have been the end of the debate, but it wasn't. Because by 1999, paleontologist Thomas Carr was pushing back against Bakker's conclusion. But why? He argued that Nano wasn't a separate species at all, just a Tyrannosaurus rex that hadn't finished growing yet. Every trait that looked distinctive, Carr argued, was simply what a baby T-Rex looked like. Carr's theory caught on quickly. It made its way into textbooks and documentaries. But here's the part almost nobody talks about today. Bakker had actually been right. The field just didn't have the technologies to confirm it yet. Here's the catch with determining a dinosaur's age by its size alone. Bone structure holds real information about age. Bone size on its own does not. Picture two men standing exactly the same height. One is 25 years old. The other is 60. Height, so bone size, tells you nothing about who is older. The answer is underneath the surface, in the bone structure. Slice into a dinosaur's fossilized bone, and you'll find growth rings much like a tree trunk, one added per year. They're spaced wide during strong growth and packed tight once growth stops for good. Paleontologists call this bone histology, and it turns a simple cross-section into a documented record of an animal's entire life. In 2025, that exact method finally got applied to Nanotyrannus with real precision. The specimen at the center of it, nicknamed the dueling dinosaurs, had been unearthed back in 2006. But it spent years tangled in a legal dispute over ownership before finally reaching the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, an American institution that made sure these fossils would finally be available for study instead of sitting in a private vault. A team led by Lindsay Zano sliced into one of its leg bones. Under magnification, the growth rings near the bone's surface were packed tightly together, a documented feature called an external fundamental system. It's the strongest available signal that an animal had fully stopped growing. This individual was around 20 years old, at death. No Nanotyrannus fossil had ever shown this pattern before. Boss, this is the part where the case stopped being an opinion and became a paper trail. Because the skull added a second layer to the evidence. Detailed scans turned up an extra sinus cavity near the roof of the mouth, a differently shaped bone at the rear of the jaw, and a higher tooth count than any T-Rex on record. It also lacked a channel called the subnaural foramen, present in nearly every other carnivorous dinosaur. These kinds of features form in the embryo, long before hatching, and stay fixed for life. In other words, none of these differences could have appeared later through growth. They were there from the very start. Years of comparison also failed to turn up a single trait shared exclusively between Nanotyrannus and T-Rex. Every similarity between them also showed up across other tyrannosaurs. There was no scientific ground left for treating them as the same animal.
There's up to 17 teeth in this part of the upper jaw in Nanotyrannus, and there's only 12 or 13 in Tyrannosaurus rex.
A second research team took a completely different route into the same question. They turned to the hyoid, a small, fragile bone buried deep in the throat that anchors the tongue. It's one of the last bones anyone expects to survive. 66 million years underground. Finding one intact is rare enough on its own. Finding one you can actually study is rarer still. Under the microscope, its growth pattern told the exact same story as the leg bone the first team had examined. The animal was fully mature. It was Nanotyrannus. But before you say, great, that settles it, there are two serious complications. First, we found one Nanotyrannus specimen that refuses to fit into what we thought was the key to its anatomical secrets. It's nicknamed Jane and lacked the sinus cavity while carrying an odd bony ridge near the eye socket.
The brain of Nanotyrannus is shaped in a very different way from Tyrannosaurus rex. And you cannot change, because that is buried deeply in bone, you're not going to change the orientation of those semicircular canals of the inner ear. So clearly, this was a different animal.
These weren't minor quirks. They pointed to an entirely separate species, which the researchers named Nanotyrannus lithius. Second, until today it is true that no paleontologist can answer the question of where all the T-Rex juveniles are. The paleontologist Stephen Brusatte asked, if every small tyrannosaur skeleton discovered so far belongs to Nanotyrannus, then where did all the young T-Rex go? even if one turned up tomorrow, there's a deeper issue standing in the way. Of all significant T-Rex fossils known to exist, more are in private hands than in public museums. Only about 1 in 10 fossils collected commercially ever ends up somewhere researchers can study them. These aren't cheap curiosities either. A T-Rex skeleton named Stan sold at Christie's for nearly $32 million in 2020. At those prices, most museums simply can't compete. So a meaningful share of what gets pulled out of the ground never reaches a research paper at all. It disappears into a private collection instead. Also, juveniles of almost any species tend to leave a thinner, more fragile fossil record. Their bones are less durable and easier to overlook entirely. Stay with us for this last twist, because it changes how Nanotyrannus fits into the dinosaur family tree overall. The new analyses suggest that while Nano lived at the same time as T-Rex, its lineage actually split off from the Tyrannosaur family much earlier. For context, think of crocodiles. They look ancient because they are, but their lineage branched off from other reptiles a very long time ago, long before dinosaurs even existed, yet crocodiles are still very much alive right now. Nanotyrannus seems to have a similar story. It belongs to a much older branch of the Tyrannosaur family tree that was still around when T-Rex showed up at the very end of the Cretaceous period, around 66 million years ago. So, where does that leave us? Paleontology is still split into 2 camps. Some call the fossil evidence conclusive. Others say Nano's case stays open until someone accounts for the missing T-Rex juveniles. You're free to weigh both sides and decide for yourself. Here's what isn't up for debate. As of late 2025, 2 independent teams ran the most thorough analyses Nano's fossils have ever received, confirming that Nanotyrannus was real. Picture what that means. 66 million years ago, Hellcrete wasn't a one-predator world with T-Rex sitting alone at the top. It was crowded, competitive. Fossil hunters have even found teeth from several different Nanotyrannus individuals in the remains of the same prey animal. That's rare, and it raises a real possibility. These animals may have hunted in packs. Nobody knew any of this a year ago. The fossils never changed. What changed was the method used to read them, and the willingness to reopen a case we had already considered closed,